Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Assistant Professor of Political Science, Director of the African American Studies Department at University of Detroit Mercy, Alex Zamalin, on his book, Against Civility, Hidden Racism in Our Obsession with Civility. Meanwhile, 8 dead in 3 Atlanta massage parlors, FBI investigating for possible Asian hate crime. Joe Biden comes out in support of the filibuster reform. Trump administration reportedly pushed Brazil to reject Russia's vaccine. U.S. COVID infections may have been twice the number reported. All this as new hotspots emerge in the upper Midwest and the New York City area. Biden, in an interview, urges migrants to stay home and orders a gag rule on the Border Patrol. Meanwhile, FEMA head says migrant COVID rate lower than Texans. 72% of Americans approve of the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill as elected Republicans reel in its wake. Internal memos apparently show the Obama administration Justice Department completely bungled a Google antitrust case. The state attorney generals in Republican states threatened to sue the federal government as the COVID relief bill had been used to finance tax cuts. Lastly, Medicare for All bill drops in the House. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us Wednesday. Emma Vigeland is here. Sadly, she has deprived everyone of our traditional Wednesday white shirt day. But
White Shirt Wednesday, you can
White Shirt Wednesday,
abbreviate it.
White Shirt Wednesday, but that is one of the provisions of White Shirt Wednesday is that you don't necessarily have to wear a white shirt.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to people, but that's kind of how we celebrate White Shirt Wednesday. I considered wearing a white sweater, and I thought it best to rebel against you, my boss.
Yes. Well, all right. I appreciate that. I mean, of course, I didn't send out an edict in any way that you had to. Well, all right. I mean, it's there was a veiled threat. There was a veiled threat that was put out company-wide. You probably saw the sign at the commissary today.
Yes. You held a compulsory meeting and said, "I'm not saying you have to wear a white shirt. I'm just saying."
And if you did wear a white shirt, you have gotten the bonus 2 custards at the end of the line at the everyone. We're still waiting on more information out of this situation in Atlanta. Horrible shooting. 6 of the 8, as it's reported now, and these things always seem to evolve. 6 of the 8 victims were Asian women. It is very hard not to see this in the context of the really stunning increase in Asian American hate crimes that we have seen over the course of, over the course of the year, frankly. And, I think very often there are theoretically secondary motives here, but when you realize this is not that someone made a decision to go some specific place and shoot people and kill them, sometimes all you need to do is look at the names of the victims and look at the or maybe the the faces of victims and get a sense of what at least partially what was going through the killer's mind, or what the killer what was not stopping him. So there's more reporting to be done. Supposedly some of the police who have interviewed him are suggesting that it was a function of,
well, what he said to them was that it was a function of his sex addiction. We don't know if he went to these specific massage parlors or if he had gone to massage parlors in the past. But either way, there's a racial element to it, even if he's claiming it's not racially motivated. Just kind of the nature of that aspect of sex work has racial implications as well, based on the massage parlors that he targeted. So we're learning more information. It may not reach the threshold of he had a manifesto that documented it as a hate crime, but there are certainly racially hateful elements embedded in the targets of his murderous rampage.
Yeah, a really horrible story. We will keep an eye on that. In the meantime, last night, Joe Biden was interviewed. Was it on CBS News? I believe it was.
ABC,
No?
ABC with George Stephanopoulos.
ABC with George Stephanopoulos. And he, there was a couple of things he was asked about that are pretty relevant that we will probably get to over the course of the program. But in terms of furthering the Democratic agenda, be that as it may, Joe Biden was asked, and really not just about, frankly, about making the Senate a somewhat more democratic institution. I mean, it is structurally impossible to make it a genuinely democratic, small d democratic institution because, of course, you have the same weight of a vote accorded to someone who represents hundreds of thousands of people as the vote of someone who represents millions of people. Doesn't make any sense. That's the Senate, though. And here's Joe Biden asked about a lot of things, but one of the key things is, what is his perspective on the filibuster?
If we just took the tax rate back to what it was when Bush was president, top rate paid 39.8%, 6% in federal taxes. That would raise $230 billion. Yet they're complaining because I'm providing a tax credit for childcare, for the poor, for the middle class, keeping people. And by the way, my proposal in the relief plan I put forward, it creates 7 million jobs according to a whole range of people, including Moody's on Wall Street, number one, increases the GDP by over $1 trillion, actually raises income in America and diminishes debt in America. I mean, what are these guys talking about?
By your own admission, you just say you're not likely to get Republican votes for the tax increase. You're not likely to get Republican votes for H.R. 1, expanding voting rights, or the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So aren't you going to have to choose? I know you've been reluctant to do away with the filibuster. Aren't you going to have to choose between preserving the filibuster and advancing your agenda?
Yes. But here's the choice. I don't think you have to eliminate the filibuster. You have to do it what it used to be when I first got to the Senate and back in the old days when you used to be around there. And that is that a filibuster, you had to stand up and command the floor. And you had to keep talking alone. You couldn't call for, no one could say, quorum call. Once you stopped talking, you lost that, and someone could move in and say, I moved the question of. So you got to work for the filibuster.
So you're for that reform. You're for bringing back the talking filibuster.
I am. That's what it was supposed to be. Look, I think, don't hold me to the numbers, George, but I think between 1960 and 2000, there were like, I'm making this number up, I don't know. There were like, 50 filibusters. And now they're like 200 since then. Since that
Just put a hold on it, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, so the idea, it almost is getting to the point where there's, democracy's having a hard time functioning. And so, look, I'm not saying this is going to be easy, George, but I do believe there's enough Republicans over time who are going to have, look,
they haven't had that epiphany you said you were going to see in the campaign.
No, well, I've only been here 6 weeks, pal. Okay, give me a break. Been here 6 weeks. I think the epiphany is going to come between now and 2022. This is there's 78% of the people say they support this program. 52% of Republicans. Let's assume it's off by 15%. You're going to go home and campaign. Republican voters want that $1,500 because they're in trouble. Republican voters want to be able to choose between being able to go to work and send their kid to a daycare that they can afford. Republican voters want to be able to
I think we get the gist here. I mean, let's put aside for a moment the clinging to this delusion that Republican lawmakers will come
hold
around.
Your breath, Joe.
But and with that said, if that I am perfectly happy for him to have that delusion if it doesn't inhibit him from coming out and saying what he said about the filibuster. I mean,
or if it's just lip service in order to get people like George Stephanopoulos who keep asking about Republican support off of his back, even though this is in keeping with Biden's obsession with appeasing Republicans.
Totally
in the
agree.
past, at least.
Totally agree. In fact, I would argue it is if it does not control what you do in terms of the filibuster, it is actually a very smart thing to do because it creates an expectation. I'm a reasonable guy and I'm expecting them to come by here. And if the Republicans don't show up with votes, which they won't, then they're being unreasonable, as it were. But let's talk about this filibuster thing, because this is huge.
Huge.
And, others have made this point. It would be very hard to imagine a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, for that matter, or frankly, really anybody in the Democratic field to be able to move the Democrats in the Senate in a 50-50 tie to essentially defang the filibuster. It's still, it allows you to slow things down. It's going to make it hard to move things forward, but there's actually a path as opposed to what we have now. The fact that when he talks about from 1960 to year 2000, there were only 50 filibusters. I actually think there was less. But he was literally in the Senate.
Well, he has the credibility because he was elected in 72, and then
for 30
I guess
of those years.
in 75, that was when the 60 vote threshold was implemented.
From 67.
Sorry.
And from 67. And the Senate just didn't filibuster as much. They just didn't. They just said, like, look, we're going to respect that the majority wants this. I'm going to try and slow it down. I'm going to try and register my extreme opposition to this, but that's it. I'm going to register my extreme opposition. I'm not going to sink it. And now I don't know if, I can't get into Joe Biden's head, but at the very least, that is he goes to Joe Manchin, he goes to Kristen Sinema, he goes to anybody who calls himself a Senate institutionalist and says, you're talking to the biggest Senate institutionalist.
Right.
I see your Senate institutionalism and I raise it. And you cannot in any way argue against that.
Yeah, I agree. And
so he goes, he has a compelling case. If he says, like, look, this is not the way it was done before. What we're doing now, what we see now is actually an affront to the institution of the Senate. Now, look, I don't know if that's the case or not. I mean, leave that to historians. But the point is, that's the argument he can make. And the implications of this are not just that we're going to carve out something for HR 1. The implications of it are that there's going to be more potential for more bail. Now, understand, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are going to rule the day under the situation, because if it is just a standard operating procedure that you're not going to have to worry about the filibuster at the end of the day, they're going to leverage this. But it's going to mean some activity, and it's going to mean a difference even when Republicans get into office and when they control the Senate. It's going to mean they're going to be held responsible for what they do on some level.
Yeah, and I think, look, to your point about if Bernie Sanders were president, I think he would have fought in different ways, and he would not have this kind of more tweaking within the system mentality, as he would have a more holistic, substantive overhaul of the corruption and the procedures that have held us back for so long. So obviously I voted for Bernie Sanders, would rather Bernie Sanders be president. But what we're seeing right now is like in the 80th percentile of the best case scenario of what Joe Biden could have been in these first 2 months of being president, right? Which is, he is being pushed. I mean, people are glib about, could Biden be pushed to the left? He was pushed on this issue, this very issue. He's now in favor of the talking filibuster, which is basically saying that you are in favor of overhauling the filibuster to the point where it really can't stop certain kinds of legislation. That's massive. Manchin was pushed on this issue. We need to see what Sinema was pushed on, but even the $1.9 trillion relief bill, he was pushed there. And I think it's key to point that out. McConnell's now saying if they do this, he'll do a scorched earth campaign. And then you have Dick Durbin saying, well, this is what you already did.
Right.
There's no more arrows in their quiver, to borrow your phrase that's now in my head because we spent so much time together. There's no more credibility there for McConnell to say that he will threaten these things when he's emptied all of his arrows at the Democrats over the past
absolutely
many years.
That's the thing. You can't threaten to go to scorch the earth once you've already burnt it. And so it's going to be fascinating to see where we go from here. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Alex Zamalin on his book, Against Civility, Hidden Racism in Our Obsession with Civility. Be right back after this. Folks, just a reminder, your support makes this show possible. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com. It is your memberships that keep this show alive. You will support the free half, and you will get no commercials in the free half when we do have commercials, and then you get the fun half. So, and then we're working on an app upgrade for bonuses in the app. We're working on that as well for members. But now I'd like to welcome to the program Assistant Professor of Political Science, Director of the African American Studies Program at the University of Detroit Mercy, author of Against Civility, Hidden Racism in Our Obsession with Civility. Alex Zamalin, welcome to the program.
Hi. Great to be here, Sam.
Thanks. And I'm here, obviously, with Emma Vigeland, and really timely. I mean, I know that you wrote most of this book prior to even this summer of protests, and I would say, like, we have, and obviously prior to what happened on January 6th, and frankly, I think some of this like applies. And I'm holding off on asking this sort of like broader meta question of you. I'm trying to hold that back, but I feel like this understanding of how these calls for civility function has incredible relevance right now. But what was it that inspired you to write this? You've written a couple other books. What was it that had you focus on this really sort of, I guess, intellectual history of the deployment of the term, the concept of civility?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that struck me around the 2018 midterms was the way that the Democratic Party began to recruit calls for civility in order to pose a challenge to Trump. And what struck me at first was I thought, surely this is a problematic strategy given the deep history of civility being used by right-wing forces. But it was only when I started to actually dig deep into the long history that I started to see that civility has always been used in a deeply troubling way to disauthorize democratic movements and to justify repression and violence, specifically against people of color. So the text that I really began the book with was John C. Calhoun, who was a defender of the slaveholding class. And he gives this remarkable speech. It's stunning. In 1837, he goes in front of the Senate floor. And just as William Lloyd Garrison is convening 300,000 abolitionists to protest slavery, Calhoun, the defender of the slaveholding class, says the real problem in the United States is these uncivil abolitionists. They're tearing the country apart. We need them to back down, but more importantly, we need to continue the slaveholding policies of the past several hundred years. And so that to me was a real insight into how the term becomes circulated at first. And when I saw Democrats using it in 2018, I was confused and shocked, and even more so once I learned about the history.
Well, so how do you explain that paradox? I mean, and this is the thing that's sort of fascinating to me about this term, and I want to go through. Obviously, there are certain moments in history where this term is deployed and what it means at that moment. But how do you explain that paradox that presumably Biden is deploying the concept of civility against someone who Trump clearly benefited from and stoked racism, pre-existing racism, and then sort of just like, I don't know, there was a feedback loop on some level. And I mean, how do you reconcile that paradox?
Yeah, I think that there's an asymmetry between the left and the right, or moderate Democrats and the right throughout history, which is Democrats consistently want to reach across the aisle. You see this time and time again. Think Lincoln in the late 1850s trying to make compromises. He goes so far as to say colonization is okay. This is a program sponsored by racists, but the idea of exporting Black citizens to the African continent is something that Lincoln endorses because he thinks it's a way to reach some kind of compromise. In 1996, Clinton tries to cut welfare because he wants to continue to compromise. I think that liberals or centrist Democrats believe that conversation is something that could lead to justice. They believe compromise is something that is effective for this end. But the right historically knows that civility is an incredibly powerful tool to be weaponized and used to silence any kind of democratic movements.
Do you think that contributed to the perception that Donald Trump was the truth teller too? Because in 2016, he had higher trustworthy numbers than Hillary Clinton going into the election, because the Democratic Party was so focused on being buttoned up and being civil, while Donald Trump was shooting from the hip. And it allowed there to be this perception that the Republicans, who lie all the time, took away from the Democrats, that they were the ones that were being more honest to the public.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point, because one of the patterns that I noticed as I was writing this book was that on some level, when Democrats or when the center-left parties use civility, they're really trying to come up with a middle ground. And the public understands that there's a lot at stake in white supremacy, racial injustice, violence. The right taps into this and unleashes these powerful negative emotions that the public really can get to understand. I think about 1907, which is the epidemic of the lynching era in the United States. About several thousand Black Americans have already been lynched. And the senator from South Carolina, Pitchfork Ben Tillman, goes in front of the Senate floor and essentially says that lynching isn't only something that is justified, it's necessary. And he taps into this rage and this anger where he says, we're the civil ones. We know how to police Black citizens. We know how to engage in this kind of policing of our communities. And it's this terrible, terrible thing, but the right is incredibly adept at using civility in a way to continue their white rage, you know?
Well, let's take this time to sort of define the term for us, or at least define how it's used, because from what my sense, well, I mean, why don't you do that for us? Like, what does it mean when he says we're the civil ones as we're lynching, right?
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean like we're genteel or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's striking. I mean, civility is one of these terms, and this is why I argue against it. It really depends on who's using it. And the problem is that the right is far more effective at using it for violent ends. So when you see these pictures during the lynching era of white people and children smiling as Black bodies are being lynched, they have this understanding that they are the ones who are protecting the honor of women. They're protecting the honor of the community. So in a certain sense, when someone uses civility and says, I'm civil, it really is something that depends on the frame in which they exist, the kind of society that they take to be real and true. And for white supremacists, it is absolutely civil to engage in violent activity if it means defending the honor of white women.
It's as if civility is basically a way of saying the status quo. And in the context of American history, the status quo is so intertwined with systemic racism that it's impossible to think of those two things not as one in this context. I mean, I can imagine a different society maybe where the notion of civility is, the civil order is such that it isn't contingent, built upon perpetuating racism, but that's just not that's just not us.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible point. I think that one of the things that I noticed as I was writing this book was every single major anti-racist movement and figure, Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, Martin Luther King, even if they embraced civility at the outset of the movement, eventually abandoned it because they recognized exactly what you said, Sam, which is civility and the status quo are deeply linked. And in order to be civil, you need to be tolerant of the status quo.
Tell us about this concept of civic radicalism, and like give us a sense of like when you peg this as developing. I mean, where you see it in our history. I mean, you look at this concept of civility from the sort of slave owning time, obviously into Reconstruction, and then Jim Crow, and then into the civil rights era. But give us a sense of how you track civic radicalism.
Yeah, to me, the two are deeply linked. The anti-racist movement that begins in the 19th century, think David Walker, Frederick Douglass, begins to slowly recognize that civility is a losing strategy. So what they come up with instead, and what I call civic radicalism, is the emphasis on disruptive pressure, on speaking out, arguing against the status quo, but even more importantly, organizing in a disruptive way to put concrete pressure on slavery. So I think of W.B. Du Bois' notion of the general strike, which is his understanding of how slavery is toppled, which is Black workers, enslaved folks, essentially stop working and they take their labor out of the system and they join up with the Union Army to topple the Confederacy. And so that moment of collective action, disruptive collective action, unapologetic disruptive collective action is what I see as the kind of centerpiece of civic radicalism.
one of my favorite, or maybe my favorite Martin Luther King quote, which I believe you cite in your book, is that he talks about how the greatest stepping block or barrier to progress is not the Ku Klux Klaner, right, but the quote, the white moderate who is more focused on civility and the rules of compromise, right? Can you touch on how that played into really his movement, more specifically, this dynamic that you're talking about?
Yeah, one of the things that I had to grapple with as I was writing this book was, how do I think of the civil rights movement, specifically King? Because on the one hand, King vouches for nonviolence, and that's what he's known for throughout history. But one of the things that struck me was in 1962, in December 1962, King is in Albany, Georgia, and he's protesting, and he sees Lori Pritchett, who is the Albany police chief. And what Pritchett does is he kneels in prayer with the civil rights activists, only then to make reporters go to the site where the activists aren't being beaten by police. And this becomes, for King, a recognition that the right knows how to use civility incredibly well. And so at that point, he sees that the idea of staying back, being patient, William Faulkner, the novelist, tells the civil rights activists time and time again, be patient, the South will rise to a better place. King recognizes that that's simply ineffective. And even in I Have a Dream, if you read the speech carefully, he's not only talking about turning the other cheek, he's talking about police brutality. He's talking about systemic racism. That, of course, is silenced in the retelling of his story later on. But King himself knew that civility was an ineffective tactic for countering racial injustice.
I want to get back to that concept of civic radicalism, like the relationship between the civic in the in that term and the civility. Like this is a redefinition of, on some level, of democracy, or a reappropriation of democracy.
Yeah. I think that one of the things I wanted to stress in this history is that part of what these anti-racist activists are doing time and time again is they're challenging the meaning of what a democratic society is. So you take King in 1967. He has a sermon, Where Do We Go From Here?, where he basically starts to articulate a bold critique of the Vietnam War. He starts to call for socioeconomic equality. I think of the Black Panthers in the late 1960s who develop all kinds of programs, food for poor children, loan programs, various kinds of busing programs for those who can't get around town. I mean, this to me is at the root of civic radicalism, because it involves a rethinking of democracy as something that isn't just voting or supporting a political campaign. It is completely changing the structure of who gets to participate and who's free.
Is it your sense that, I mean, and you talk about the sort of, I guess, maybe one of the earliest sort of, you mentioned Frederick Douglass earlier, but the contrast between he and Booker T. Washington. Why don't you just tell us about that? And then I'm curious as to, has this been relearned through as you go through history and there are emancipatory struggles? Has this been relearned each time, or has there been some type of I don't want to say institutional, but some type of memory that because it feels like it's been relearned every time.
Right. I mean, this is one of these dynamics. So Douglass and Washington's position from the beginning of his life till the end was that the way forward was compromise, reconciliation. That's what he basically tells a predominantly white audience at the Atlanta Exposition in 1896. And Douglass's position throughout his life, who is an ex-enslaved man who escapes, he's a fugitive, is struggle. And in a certain sense, you see this played out throughout history, which is the conservative strain, which says that picking oneself up by the bootstraps, a kind of rugged individualism, can lead to freedom. And on the other hand, the vision sponsored by Douglass, Ida B. Wells, W.B. Du Bois, which says organization and collective action. To your second question, Sam, I think yes, I think that there is this deep tendency and desire to believe that civility and reconciliation works. I mean, I'm not sure if it is precisely because the status quo is so entrenched, and it seems like reconstructing it is such a monumental task that it's easier to subscribe to these fantasies of reconciliation and community, or whether it is a kind of strategic concession. That was one interpretation of Washington. The most charitable interpretation of Booker T. Washington was he tried to live within the constraints of a system so that he can navigate a small slice of Black freedom through Tuskegee, through the funding of various colleges. I don't think that that is the effective strategy given the long history we have of civic radical movements, but it's either a strategic compromise or perhaps a recognition of how pervasive systemic racism is in society.
And doesn't the privileging of civility kind of other activists, it makes them seem more alien, more scary.
Right.
It makes progress, it saps it of its natural tension and the beauty in that, almost in how people on the front lines are fighting for progress in via protest. I mean, it's almost conspiratorial in that way, in that like it really does sap it of its energy.
Yeah, that is one of the most kind of effective tools of the right. I think at the 2018 senatorial race in Mississippi, when Cindy Hyde-Smith against Mike Espy, the Black Democrat, said that I love a supporter so much that I would join him at a public hanging. Now, Mississippi literally had the most per capita lynchings compared to any state. So it would make sense that there was an outcry around this statement calling Cindy Hyde-Smith racist, suggesting that she was tapping into the long history of Republicans using race in order to win elections. And yet her response was, it's the activists who are pushing against her that are the violent ones. It's these activists who are on the front lines that are the real menace to society. It's not only Cindy Hyde-Smith. I think of several, liberals who decry the way students are toppling these Confederate monuments. And their view is that they're the real threat to freedom in society. This is a consistent theme that we see time and time again.
How much has, what is also striking to me is, and our audience knows that I've, become very much sort of almost obsessed with Reconstruction at this point. But what is just constant shock to me is the number of massacres that took place of Black people during Reconstruction that have been completely erased. Wilmington, Hamburg, Opelousas, I can never pronounce that. Others, there we've spoken prior to Reconstruction. There was a massive burgeoning wealthy class of Black people throughout what was then the Northwest Territories, in Ohio, that region, farmers who whose property was basically stolen from them through legal means, of course, at that time. But all of these sort of active, I mean, aside, obviously slavery, but once there was, when people were emancipated, when they were making money or they were holding office, there has been these violent, literally violent, sometimes horrifically violent uprisings by white people that were, planned and strategized. And they have been completely erased from our memory. I mean, it's as if if there had been 1,000 Black people who had stormed the Capitol, I feel like we would have a national holiday
Mhm.
to recognize that. And I'm not convinced that, like, January 6th in 2 years that anybody's ever going to remember it again.
Mhm.
What's happening with that dynamic?
Well, I think one of the things that really was quite striking and stunning as I went to the history of these events that you're describing was how civility was used in almost all of these encounters. So I think of the Wilmington Massacre, 1898. What's striking about it was that you literally had a free Black community that was prosperous, that was essentially taking seriously all of Booker T. Washington's ideas of uplift. So they were practicing the civility that Booker T was endorsing. And yet the governor of North Carolina, or soon to be governor, then Wilmington Mayor Alfred Waddell, essentially says that white people have every right to come in, storm Wilmington, destroy everything, the newspaper, the press, and leave the city in shambles. Why? Because, and this was the striking quote that I just couldn't get over. Why? Because it was for their own good. White people, in their mind, in a white supremacist society, always assume that they're the civil ones. And they always assume that their acts of violence are justified because they restore the order as it was before. And I gave the example of Ben Tillman, who gives this speech in 1907. This is another important point. Ben Tillman comes to prominence because he literally is involved in a massacre, 1876, with a paramilitary organization called the Red Shirts. They kill 6 free Black men in Hamburg. And this becomes one of the ways that he rises up in the ranks and gets power. So when we think about Trump and the appeal to violence, that has been integral to the right. The appeal to violence and the restoration of white honor has been central in American history.
When you argue for for not falling into that civility trap, and it's also, I guess it's baby cousin of the respectability politics, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that we saw that Barack Obama was, I guess our generation's Booker T. Washington on some level, with the respectability politics. When you argue against that, you're not necessarily arguing for violence.
Of course not. Right.
It is for what? I mean,
right.
what does one do when one? It's one thing to say, like, to be aware of this term is being deployed in a certain way, it's being used in a certain way, but in terms of an action, what do you not do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a great question, and I think that question itself speaks to the way that we're trapped in our civility thinking, right? As if it's one or the other. To me, civility politics and a civility orientation means that you always stress compromise. You always stress reconciliation. A civic radical politics means you stand up for what you believe in. And the historical pattern is that nonviolent disruptive action, whether it's a boycott, a march, a strike, organization through unions, these are the tactics that have been most successful for anti-racist movements. So I think of the organizing campaign in Bessemer, Alabama against Amazon. That is part of that legacy. When I think of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is about organizing against police brutality and mass incarceration, that is kind of lockstep with King and his I Have a Dream speech. It's not by any means a defense of violence, precisely because violence leads to more repression. Anytime there has been, as you rightly pointed out, even the potential of Black-led insurrectionary, revolutionary violence, it is stamped out and the police presence is increased by tenfold. So what I'm advocating for is a nonviolent politics of collective action that puts pressure on systems, economic, political, social, in order to push them to change.
And is that effective because it either A, creates the change or forces a backlash that exposes the power dynamic in such a way that changes the minds of people who might be sitting on the sidelines?
I think it's actually both. I think the most important thing is that it allows anti-racist movements and democratic movements to play on their own terms. Because when you use the language of civility, as you pointed out, you're always wrestling with the status quo. You always have to justify your activity within the context of what exists. But with civic radicalism, you're always trying to create a new language, a new kind of strategy that draws in more people. So I think of Bernie's campaign. I think of these kinds of leaders and movements, Occupy, Black Lives Matter, that are trying to bring disaffected citizens in. That's the story of civic radicalism. Rather than reaching across the aisle, you expand your base from those who may not have been interested in politics and may not have even thought that there was a problem to begin with.
But you are advocating at that point, though, with the concept of civic, is maintaining at the very least the structures of our democracy. It is just change what happens within the context of those structures.
Right, exactly. It's an idea of change through policy, through legislation, through referendum that leads to a system of equality and justice. But it's certainly working within the system to push the system to realize incredible change. I mean, one of the things that was striking to me was when you look at the labor movement in the 1920s and 1930s, or as you put it, Reconstruction. In 1865, the creation of the Freedmen's Bureau. All of these were inventions of the state, of government. You don't need to step outside the system in order to make the system work in a just and democratic fashion. And I think that that is one of the great lessons of American history.
I want to just touch on a little bit. Maybe we should have said this before, but where does the notion of normative values play into this? Because I on one hand, I feel like civility is deployed really as just a euphemistic way of saying status quo. And in this country, the status quo is white patriarchy. I mean, it just is. It always has been. I think maybe it's arguably a little bit less than it has been in our past. I mean, I would say definitely a little bit less. But it still is, still look the old white guy in the White House, and he's able to do these things that maybe others wouldn't. But where does the normative values come in, and where is it possible to be engaged in civic radicalism and still maintain the normative values, or those normative values need to be shattered as part of that civic radicalism?
Well, I think, I think I would look back to King, and I think about King's sermons on love. If you read King's sermons on love, he sounds a lot more like Bernie rather than Biden. He's talking about economic redistribution. He's talking about food and benefits for the poor. And so I think that when you're talking about norms for justice and for society, you can re-signify, change norms that we already are familiar with, but you can talk about a radical love as opposed to a love of simply caring for the neighbor or praying after a massacre or what have you, that you can find norms within society, whether it's love, hospitality, equality, that speak to a much broader, a more open, a more democratic notion of existence that still matters and is still based in values.
Well, it's a fascinating piece. Alex Zamalin, the book is Against Civility, The Hidden Racism and Our Obsession with Civility. We will put a link to that at majority.fm. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. back. Oh, we're back. So we had mentioned earlier that during that interview last night with ABC News, Joe Biden had a couple of news-making moments, I would say. The biggest one from my perspective was his I think, full-throated endorsement for a change in the filibuster, which would allow legislation to pass through. But he also was asked about a major scandal that is brewing in New York State. And, sometimes you talk about New York, we live here, and you hope that you're not being too myopic. But let's face it, New York State could be a place, ultimately. New York State politics are sort of famously corrupt, but could be a place where we are on the forefront of progressive legislation. It has not been, largely because Andrew Cuomo, for many years, was harboring a great desire to have a national political career and felt that we were living in the 1990s and wanted to prevent himself to have to veto progressive legislation. And so he had essentially midwifed a caucus of Democrats to caucus with Republicans to prevent legislation from hitting his desk that he would have to veto. And now,
well, yes, among many other corruption issues, and
he disbanded the Moreland Commission, which was looking into corruption in the state. And when they started looking into him, he disbanded it.
His top aide is in prison right now for corruption. I mean, the list goes on and on with this guy.
On and on. And the latest two scandals were, one, that he apparently had advisors who were hiding the number of nursing home deaths in this state, because he wanted his leadership book about COVID-19 to really pop. And now there are 7 women who have come forward with allegations of sexual harassment. Joe Biden was asked about them last night. This is clip number 3.
Let me ask you about Governor Cuomo of New York. I know you've said you want the investigation to continue. If the investigation confirms the claims of the women, should he resign?
Yes, I think he probably end up being prosecuted too.
But how about right now? You've said you want the investigation to continue. You saw Chuck Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, majority of the congressional delegation don't think he can be an effective governor right now. Can he serve effectively?
Well, that's a judgment for them to make about their state, where they can be effective. Here's my position. It's been my position since I wrote the Violence Against Women Act. A woman should be presumed to telling the truth and should not be scapegoated and become victimized by her coming forward, number one. But there should be an investigation to determine whether what she says is true. That's what's going on now.
And you've been very clear. If the investigation confirms the claims, he's gone.
That's what I think happens. And by the way, it may very well be, there could be a criminal prosecution that is attached to it. I just don't know, but let the investigation, and I don't know what it is, but I start with the presumption. It takes a lot of courage for women to come forward. Some are not, anyway, it takes a lot of courage to come forward. So the presumption is it should be taken seriously and it should be investigated. And that's what's underway now.
He has to throw the Violence Against Women Act in there. And it's just like, he's in he just has this mode that's like compulsive. He has to include that, which by the way, he tied into his notorious crime bill, but I digress.
What I also thought was interesting was at one moment you saw him hesitate there, where he said, women need to be heard now, of course, and then they need to be investigated. And I think that hesitation, I don't know. I mean, I think obviously there were allegations against him from a woman, Tara Reid. They were, I don't know if they were actually, to the extent that they were ever criminally investigated, there was not enough evidence that was found at that time. But certainly reporters subsequent to her allegations, reporting that came out sort of much later after the controversy had died down, suggest that that she wasn't necessarily, she had a history. Let's put it this way. Seems incontrovertible. She had a history of lying to other people that she had in her life. Now, not necessarily those type of lies. And Joe Biden did have, 5 or 6 women who came out and said that they felt that he was getting in their space, but you didn't have.
At the very least, that was documented. Like the getting in the space, we have video evidence of him doing that. At the very least, he did that, right? And I just want to make this point because I'm frustrated that this is the focus, though. He should be out based on the cover-up of nursing home deaths, where he tried to fudge his COVID effectiveness numbers by covering up nearly half of the deaths that he caused by his decision to put COVID positive nursing home patients back into nursing homes, and then it spread like wildfire there naturally. You could own that decision, but that might threaten your book deal or future book deals and your credibility as this COVID savior. That's what should be the primary focus. Not that this isn't legitimate, but there are bodies, there are dead body counts, thousands and thousands that are attributable to his decision making there.
I mean, I think to a certain extent, there's sort of like that we're going to get Al Capone on taxes type of situation where there are certain, we are now in the realm of politics that I think the salience of the way that he treated people had more resonance with the public, for better or for worse. But I agree with you. Certainly what he did with the nursing homes, incredibly egregious. All right. Well, that's it for us today. We'll talk more about it tomorrow. We will see you then, unless we see you now. And not only will you see Emma and I now,
hello,
but moving into the Zoom playing field.
Yes, the Zoom playing field.
The Zoom.
There he is. That's what it's called, Sam. The official word, the Zoom playing field.
The Zoom playing field. Brandon Stutton. Brandon's going to join us for the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Brandon, welcome.
Oh, and thank you for having me, Sam. Tardy.
Let's go through. You're tardy? No, you're right on time.
Oh, that's great then. I'm not sorry.
Brandon, why don't you tell us what's coming up on your podcast?
Well, my podcast, we like to stay fresh, loose, casual, not just casual Friday, but casual Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Sam, and Emma and Matt and Brendan. So coming up on my podcast, we do a Twitch stream every morning. One of my co-hosts, John, does a Twitch stream. So check that out for a little bit of the daily news. And, coming
What's
up,
the address of that Twitch stream, Brandon?
I believe it's the same as the Twitter account, the Discourse, but the first E is a 3, not because it's cool, but because someone had already taken the E.
Right.
So, it happens.
And
so we're expanding, is what I'm telling you, as what I'm trying to say, Sam.
Congratulations.
Coming into the second quarter of the 2021, we're going to try to expand.
All right. Well, then I'll give you one of these. Don't forget to check out Nomi's show, streaming today at 3 p.m. The Nomi Key show on youtube.com or on twitch.tv, _Nomi Key _show. And Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian media empire?
Tomorrow night on Left Reckoning, Victor Puggi, formerly of the Intercept Brazil, who worked on the Lukes that helped blow up the Lava Jato investigation, will be joining David and I for about an hour to discuss Lula and Bolsonaro and all that good stuff. So it's a really great interview. We actually recorded it yesterday. You'll want to check that out. Tomorrow night, 8 Eastern, Left Reckoning YouTube channel, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
All right. And let me just say this before we go to the fun half. Got an IM. Hi, MR crew. Longtime listener and member since 2015. Every year I am asking for a birthday shofar, but have never gotten one. Am I ignored on purpose? What does a middle-aged woman have to do? Is this ageism? Since Sam and I are the same age, it does make me wonder. Signed, Not Karen. Well, here is a shofar for Not Karen. See you in the fun half. Oh, that's awkward.
In for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost has what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dannerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck them.
Almost has what?
Almost
says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
The alpha males are back. And the Africans are black Africans. The alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little party you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. I am now unmuted. Brandon Sutton, Emma Vigeland, Matt, and Brendan are here. Let's start with this clip of Mitch McConnell. Brandon, we touched on the what Joe Biden had to say last night on ABC about the filibuster, and this is good news. Here's Mitch McConnell warning Democrats what will happen if the filibuster is eliminated. And of course, that's not what anybody's talking about. They're talking about reforming the filibuster. But here is Mitch McConnell.
Nobody serving in this chamber can even begin to imagine what a completely scorched earth Senate would look like. None of us have served 1 minute in a Senate that was completely drained of comedy and consent. the most mundane task of the Biden presidency would actually be harder, not easier. We're Democrats in a post-nuclear Senate that is 50-50, dead even. If the Democrats break the rules to kill Rule 22 on a 50-50 basis, then we will use every other rule to make tens of millions of Americans' voices heard. Perhaps the majority would come after the other rules next. Perhaps Rule 22 would just be the first domino of many, until the Senate ceased to be distinct from the House in any respect. This chaos would not open up an express lane to liberal change. It would not open up an express lane for the Biden presidency to speed into the history books. The Senate would be more like a 100-car pileup. Nothing moving.
Pretty sure he just described I know, the good sound effects. Pretty sure he just described what the Senate was like under his leadership as majority leader that entire time. It's like, yes, we can imagine. And by the way, just quickly, I love that he brought up that tens of millions of Americans wouldn't be represented and the 50-50 split. That's already the case. The 50 Democratic senators who represent their constituents represent over 40 million more Americans than the Republicans do. That's the problem. He's scared.
Were you scared by that, Brandon? Did he scare you there?
Well, I was a little scared.
The theremin, did that scare you?
Yeah, I was a little bit scared with the theremin music in the background because I thought I might just be hallucinating until, it really came in. I was like, okay, great.
Me too.
So it's not just me. It was a little Area 51-y at the end, but, it kind of maintained it. But also towards the end, I was struck by how much he's starting to sound like a Southern Bane, like a little bit of like a Southern radical, like, Bane from Dark Knight. Very, voice is getting very deep.
Yeah, right.
You won't understand the chaos that will reign in the Senate.
Well, he's got that like clenched jaw. It's almost like if he opens his mouth a little too wide, the whole like fleshy apparatus beneath his neck will just melt away. So he's got to just keep it as tight-lipped as possible. No emoting at all, even though he wants to be as threatening. That's kind of a supervillain trope too.
I love how he actually pretended like you think this is going to be an opportunity for liberal legislation to get through, and as if he's interested in anything going through, like he's giving advice here. I mean, I think this is a Hail Mary. What's also interesting to keep in mind when you hear him say this stuff, he has at least initiated the process in the Kentucky legislature to change the way that Senate replacements are made if a federal senator resigns during his term or her term, I guess. And instead of the governor picking that person, who, as you will recall, is a Democrat now in Kentucky, he would have the legislature do it, who is controlled by the Republicans. So he is, at the very least, setting up a situation where he can leave the Senate and have himself replaced by a Republican. And I wonder if this impacts his timing to do that, if he thinks the filibuster is going to get repealed, because it's going to make him look weak if he leaves after the filibuster is repealed.
It might make him look weak, Sam, but one thing that I'm also struck by, and I think Emma kind of touched on it too, is that he's positioning the move to reform the filibuster back to, I think Biden said, just having it be a talking filibuster. You have to actually just stand up there and talk for as long as you want to hold up the vote. I think there's a part of this that's trying to frame that as a transition from normal democracy to some sort of chaotic anarchy that is just going to destroy what is already a historically intransigent Senate. But I think we also have to talk about the ways in which the anti-democratic nature of the Senate itself, how we are constantly being held captive by states that have populations less than cities in other states, which people have highlighted many times, but also just the way the GOP has sort of jerry-rigged the process to ensure that despite losing the popular vote, wholesomely in terms of like all the people who vote for senators and congressmen, by tens of millions of votes, they still managed to eke out this sort of slim majority to slim minority. Like they've already been allowed to stack the deck in a way to give the illusion that, there is a 50-50 split in America in terms of what people want, whether that be specifically Republicans and Democrats or even what the GOP represents, when in reality, they just, they've been allowed to draw the lines of the map in a way that allows them to claim a, 50-50 split with 25 or less percent of the country. And, I think the Democrats would be, best to start really highlighting that, not just at the election time, but throughout this process. Like, yeah, but, it's already a little anti-democratic.
Yeah.
Well, they perfected the art of minority rule by hook or by crook, basically. And that's why McConnell's so scared there. He's threatening a scorched earth campaign against the Democrats, as if they didn't exhaust every single avenue in order to obstruct and force through Republican conservative legislation. I mean, the reason he's doing what you said, Sam, is because what is there left for McConnell to do? He's been the most effective lawmaker in the Senate of the past 50 years because he's stacked the Supreme Court through obstruction with his conservative young justices. Legislatively, they've slashed taxes and regulations, a lot of which will be really hard to put back together. He's done his villainous duty for the devil, so he's trying to get an out now, and that's what we're seeing there. It's desperation. He knows that it's not even Dick Durbin saying basically, we're not buying it. The Democratic Party isn't buying it anymore, and he's exhausted all of his opportunities. He might as well bow out now.
Let's move on to another topic. I'm sure all of you recall a couple of years ago, Dave Rubin was threatening to move to Texas because there are less taxes there. Texas. Taxless is what he would call it. If
his idol Ben Shapiro moved there. Remember, he got a cowboy hat and a truck.
There you go.
Moved to Tennessee.
He moved to
Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Well, still,
Moved to
I'm
a state
blocked by
we could
Dave
see
Rubin on Twitter, so I can't follow his escapades anymore.
Well, you were blocked by Dave Rubin?
Yeah, I was blocked by Dave Rubin.
Me too. He eventually, he finally did it. I don't know, a year or two ago. I can't remember. But Dave Rubin, and at the time, and in fact, if somebody finds the video, you can send it to me. I would love to see it because I will figure out a way of inserting it into his most recent clip here. But at the time, I distinctly remember, go to Texas, buddy. Let's see how they enjoy you down in Texas. Let's see. You keep saying Texas is so much better. Go to Texas. You will find in some fashion or another your life inhibited by their attitude towards a man who has married a man, and not obviously not. That is a disparagement of Texas, but it's also just calling Dave Rubin on his BS. He likes living in California because it's better. It's better for what he wants. And guess what he did yesterday, apparently? Admitted it.
And I will say one thing, I crap on California a lot for obvious reasons, the taxes, the regulation, the homelessness, the whole thing. California does have the best laws around surrogacy, especially for same-sex couples in the United States, significantly better than places like Texas and Florida. So when I bash on California all the time and I say all the great things about some of those red states, it's not like everything is absolutely perfect. And that partly is one of the reasons that we haven't bolted just yet. But anyway, I have no doubt that I'm going to get a ton of messages from you guys.
He's going to face blowback for saying, actually, Democratic-run states make my life as a gay man a little bit easier, but I'm rich, and so I can kind of push aside all those other concerns in order to throw red meat to my audience.
I mean, it goes beyond that. It's basically like he's conceding the point that, in Texas, in some respects, I would be treated like a second-class citizen. I would go there and my husband and I would not have the same rights, literally the rights that we have here in this state. We would not be able to start a family. We would not be, we would be disparaged, and we would be second-class citizens in some fashion in Texas. But, you got to weigh these things out. I mean, honestly, that's...
He spoke too much truth there.
Yeah,
really
uncharacteristically honest, like just uncharacteristically honest on Dave Rubin's part. I haven't seen that kind of honesty from him since he was doing stand-up back in the early 2000s. But in between.
Did you ever see his stand-up back then?
I have seen his stand-up because the comedy special that he was the host of, Hot Gay Comics, has just recently been put on Hulu, and it's one of the most baffling comedy specials I've ever seen in my entire life because it's all questions.
Someone
It's all
reposted
questions.
those clips, right? Like recently they recirculated, and it was all just like about, what was it, Brandon? It was about,
it's questions. They're just questions. It's about a 10 to 15 minute set of all demographic questions, ranging from who in the crowd is married to who in the crowd is gay to who in the crowd has kids, and they're all setups for like incredibly specific jokes that about lesbians not using shopping carts, or about like Pinkberry being some kind of gay lesbian haven. And to be honest, it's not funny. I don't like stand-up comedy, so I'm a bad judge of what isn't funny. But the crowd wasn't feeling it. The crowd was just trying to have a good time, order some food. He was interrupting women who were ordering, asking if they were bisexual because they like to read. It was a bit hard to watch. And I would say, if you like stand-up, or if you don't like stand-up, give it a watch. It's called Hot Gay Comics on Hulu right now, also on Tubi, on all your free streaming services. And it's perhaps the most baffling stand-up comedy I've ever seen. Back to the original point, though, I wonder how he struggles with the idea that he would be a second-class citizen in Texas despite all the money and fame he has. It's my kind of question, because he sees people like Joe Rogan, Dave Chappelle, Elon Musk, that crowd move to Texas, do stand-up comedy, catch COVID, do more stand-up comedy, the whole shebang. And, he may not want to do stand-up comedy and catch COVID, but I think that, you would imagine that the sort of contradiction between, hey, I'm a rich and famous white guy, and I'd like to move to a place with my, where my theoretical ideological beliefs are being represented in the law of the land. But, turns out they don't actually like me. So I'm going to stay where I'm in constant conflict with, liberal society, both for content and for, it makes my life easier, which is, fair enough to him.
But I think you're giving him too much credit. I don't think he's in constant conflict with it. I think he's such a pay to play commentator that really the only thing that's preventing him from doing that to keep up his charade is the fact that his rights are better in California. Like, I don't think he feels like he's doing anything that's morally wrong, because he doesn't really have that level of introspection.
Well, in California, you're not allowed to ask questions. So, you can see liberal states, they don't allow questions. Red states, very inquisitive. And that's his whole bit. So, at the end of the day, he finds himself.
I wonder if he's also worried about living in close proximity. I mean, obviously Texas is a big place. I have no idea where he would go, but and I'm not exactly sure where Glenn Beck's big studio is down there. But I wonder if he was in closer proximity, just like an hour flight away, as opposed to 3 or 4 hours, if there wasn't, or drive away, if he wouldn't be concerned about sort of, because, I think Glenn Beck probably would have an issue with, and certainly his, I think his network to some extent has some hostility towards gay people getting married. But one thing that you reminded me of, Brandon, is that at one point at my son's school, this was a couple of years ago, I've lost sense of time because of COVID, but somebody came up to me. He was a reporter from the New York Times. I didn't know he was. And I don't know if he still is. I mean, he wrote about comedy, and he said, I've watched your stuff about Dave Rubin. It's really funny because Dave Rubin used to email me, mail me all the time to try and get me to write about him. And I was just like, you're not funny. And he said, but it got really sort of pathetic. But that sounded to me like Dave Rubin quite a bit.
I mean, stand-up comedy is hard. Not for me, but I've never done it. So, I imagine for people who do it regularly, it might be hard. I don't know how you do it for so long or getting good at it, but that's just,
That takes real work. I mean, because if you put in at least a certain amount of time, you get to be fairly good. But I think it's his perspective on
it. Just
stuff.
fits into the mosaic of weirdness that is Dave Rubin, and just adds another layer of his attention seeking, I would say.
Yeah.
I have a theory actually, and Sam, I know you did stand-up comedy, so maybe you can like lend credence to it. I think that his routine is a byproduct of the whole, like, you get up on stage and you go like, who's from Cleveland? If you're in Cleveland, everyone just they cheer and they clap and they go, woo,
work
woo,
in the
woo.
room, work in the
room. And when he started out, he must have gotten no cheers and claps except for with that, light crowd work stuff, the light demographic questions that are about, just random people. And he stuck with that. Eventually his routine became 90% just like crowd work in a way that has, I would say, never happened before in the history of comedy. So I think the guy should have wrote about him.
Oh, no. It's happened before. There's been a lot of people who are not, who are not good stand-ups. And so that's not particularly unique.
I do love that idea, though, of just the whole set is just.
Oh, I think Todd Barry actually did an entire tour like that. And there were certainly, I mean, that was not, honestly, that's not that unique to have like guys who come up and just do crowd work, road comics in particular. But it was fairly. You wouldn't see it so much with people who were based somewhere because other comedians would shit on them. But if you're on the road and you're just going to see like, I'm in, whatever it is, I'm in Lexington, Kentucky, and I'm working, and I got some local guy opening up for me. You'll know you never see that guy again. So you do, you do crowd work and you get away with it, and that's it. But other comedians would have disparaged him, I would imagine.
Patton Oswalt did about 10 minutes on the Northern Strip Club in Fargo after somebody's wearing a hat in the front row for it. So,
yeah. Well, no, you certainly go into, that'll definitely happen. But yeah, you just go with it when you're on the road.
I guess what was striking for me is because when you watch like it's 6 episodes of a comedy kind of Def Jam comedy special in a row, just 6 episodes in the exact same room, it kind of really sticks out to you how much people don't like it. So
it's impressive where people can project that they don't think something's funny just simply by their sheer silence over and over again.
Oh, no, they told them to.
They said?
There were a lot of hecklers in the crowd.
Oh, really?
On the special. There were people just like not feeling it.
That's nuts because you don't get that during TV recordings usually. During tapings, they get up and they go, "Look, everybody, you got to just clap and laugh," and they just revolted.
It looks like it was the pilot series for what could have been a more longer term kind of Def Comedy Jam special, but for like the LGBTQ community. Like I said, it's on Hulu now, so you can watch the full kind of edit episodes as they were recorded and aired on a now defunct channel. But they were something. I said I don't watch stand-up comedy normally. I guess that makes me kind of weird on the left, but I'm not a big stand-up comedian special. But I made time for this. Immediately got food poisoning right afterwards. Almost killed me, but I don't think that it was related. I mean, I can't prove it was related. I think it was related in my heart. I have the suspicion, but I can't prove it. And, so, your mileage might vary.
I just got somebody just sent me the Hot Gay Comics graphic. Yeah.
I will say other comedians in the special are all fine. Pretty, good stuff for early 2000s, I guess. I had a chuckle. Anything was fine after,
Yeah, well, he was chum. Throw Ruben out there, and then everyone looks great afterwards.
Let's hear the Fox and Friends folks respond to the fact. This is going to be really interesting to project out, but let's hear the Fox and Friends people react to Joe Biden saying that we need to move to a talking filibuster, which, I mean, I think this is a smart way to frame it. They are framing it as reformation of the filibuster, but in fact, it is fundamentally altering it if it's not a complete ban to moving forward legislation without a 60-vote majority. But here's Ainsley Earhart responding.
Reform. You're for bringing back the talking filibuster.
I am. That's what it was supposed to be. Look, I think, don't hold me to the numbers, George, but I think between 1960 and 2000, there were like, I'm making this number up, I don't know. There were like, 50 filibusters. And now they're like 200 since then.
Now, if they end the filibuster, the Democrats will rule our country forever. We will become a socialist country. So first they'll kill the filibuster, then they'll pass this H.R. 1, so felons can vote, no ID if you go to vote, register everybody, expand the mail-in ballots. Then guess what? They're going to start packing the court. The country's gone. It's a free-for-all if this happens. Thankfully, Joe Manchin and
Pause it for 1 second. Pause it for 1 second. I mean, this is just like, she's not even listening to the pillow talk with Hannity.
So
Because,
lazy.
first off, why would this help you pack the court? There is no filibuster for the Supreme Court anymore. Mitch McConnell got rid of that. So you're going to be able to put on however many vacancies are on the court. You're going to be able to do that already. H.R. 1, yes, it is true. It allows for automatic voter registration, and it would prevent voter ID from becoming the law of the land, and it would allow for folks who have been to prison to vote. That, of course, is not what socialism is, but she can't even get it straight as to what it would do.
Well, she just wants to throw out socialism out there. And
well, why does she bring up H.R. 1? Why not just talk about they're
because
going
they
to bring
kill
in
it. Because they want to kill it.
They're just going to, if they get rid of the filibuster, they're going to vote and have us be a socialist country. Just say that.
Well,
they're going to have the Boston bomber voting. That's just, that's all you got to say. The Boston bomber is going to vote. Terrorists are going to vote. That's their big thing now. I mean, from my perspective, I think you kind of have to disaggregate whatever filibuster reform Joe Biden is advocating for from the typical Republican fear mongering that occurs anytime Democrats are trying to do anything, and, kind of keep it sort of weighed rather, they have a talking point list that they're going to go through no matter what Joe Biden does. I know Joe Biden passes the $1.9 trillion stimulus. It's going to bring back socialism. It's going to bring the age of communism to the world. I think they are a bit scared this time, a little bit more scared than they were before, but not necessarily of socialism, just of their, I guess, increasingly, the meal ticket being over. I think Trump had a lot to do with Fox's ratings going up. Joe Biden is kind of boring. Trump is going to go, off to start his own network. What is Fox News now? What is Fox News going to be if they're not going to be representing the sort of far right in mainstream circles?
All I'm saying though is it's time for you to get your game face on, Ainsley. You got to buck up a little bit. You got to these talking points stink. Go back. Let's hear more. They're just bad. They're just
register
lazy.
Everybody, expand the mail-in ballots. Then guess what? They're going to start packing the court. The country's gone. It's a free-for-all if this happens. Thankfully, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are pushing back on this. They have said that they will not support this. But if they change their minds, it's over.
The country's over. It's like they do this every time. Again, I keep bringing up the evangelical preachers that say, or the televangelists that say the world's going to end on November 3rd, 2012, and it never happens. And then they're just put on their suit and tie on November 3rd or November 4th, the next day, whatever it is. And they come out and they just say the same thing over and over again. Just the amount of shamelessness that you have to possess to be that doom and gloom and that, up in arms about something, and then for it to be proven wrong time and time again. It just, it amazes me.
Do we know where Steve Ducey is? Why?
Yeah.
Is he on vacation or is that
I would guess so. Yeah.
Okay. I'm getting a little concerned.
He's somewhere in New Jersey, likely.
Is that right?
He's from New Jersey, yeah. Or he lives there now. He's from Kansas.
I mean, they need to amp it up. They need to amp it up, Sam. I'm not going to believe that Joe Biden is a villain until they get their rhetoric right. They really got to start really pushing it. Joe Biden's way too boring. It's for anyone to believe he's going to usher in socialism with these kind of Fox News 101 talking points. Tell me how.
That's the problem. That's the problem is that they haven't been able to crack this code, right? They're not even saying, why wouldn't they say at that point, if the filibuster is gone, Bernie Sanders is going to have the run of things. They did that before, right? That he was a puppet for AOC and this and that. And they just seem to be adrift. It's interesting.
Yes. It's truly the weakest I've seen the right-wing propaganda apparatus in forever. I mean, since the rise of Fox News, I've never seen them so hobbled and unable to come up with a coherent message. I mean, Biden confounds them because he's been a centrist, center-right politician his whole career, and now he's kind of shifted and is doing more progressive priorities that are, like, in terms of the relief package, Politico Morning Consult poll has 75% approval in the country, or 72%. It's like, what do you say? So you can't go against him on his record because you agree with everything, a lot of things in his record that are more conservative, and the things he's doing now are appropriate for the current moment and are wildly popular.
They're jammed up.
I mean, I think that creates a little bit of a danger, though, on our side, because ultimately, you know, in the absence of, well, not in the absence of Fox News is always going to be there. But I think that, you know, the absence of Fox News representing or being able to represent a more far right a more far right ideological spectrum, you know, I guess with the absence of Trump and Trump leading his own new thing now, or might be leading his own new thing now, it kind of creates this kind of weird, I think, realignment that you might see that people are sort of that's being reflected in the parties as well, where you have a lot of Republicans, you know, just kind of feeling more aligned with this new Biden wing of the party, of the Democratic Party, this kind of new mansion cinema kind of thing than they do with the remnants of the, you know, Trump coalition with the Ted Cruz's and the Marco Rubio's. Whether or not that's happening on Fox News right now, I don't know, but I think there is kind of maybe a little bit of a line they're trying to tread when it comes to the kind of older audience they're trying to cultivate now post 2021 Capitol riots, right? You know, go ahead.
It makes it easier. I should have said, really, or it makes it harder for them to make their old kind of case where they're in a bit of free fall, because obviously Biden's not black. Like, so much of what their Obama era commentary hinged on was racism and xenophobia.
I think that is true. It is also it is both. It's disturbing insofar as, look, Biden barely won, right? I mean, he barely won. You know, it was spread across 3 or 4 states, but he barely won. And although, you know, 7 million more votes, but in terms of the Electoral College, which is the reality that we operate in, barely won. And it makes it hard to imagine, you know, what would have happened if you had, you know, a woman, black man at this point, who didn't have this sort of like extraordinary charisma of Barack Obama, who's the type of politician that comes around, you know, once in a lifetime in terms of that being that charismatic. And this country is, you know, it's really just sort of almost like it's akin to the sort of the spread of COVID variants and the vaccine. Like, on some level, it's just like, what's going to win out? The sort of demographic aging out of a lot of these races. Obviously, they're not going to go away, but can they get down to like enough of a small enough of a cohort that they don't have the ability to sway elections, or not? You know, and I don't know. Let's check in with Meghan McCain and find out. There's new reports now that we're seeing, like, I think 2 or 3 times the hesitancy of Republicans to take the vaccine than Democrats. These vaccines were developed during the time that Donald Trump was president. Donald Trump has taken the vaccine. Not sure exactly where it comes from, but here is Meghan McCain explaining to us all why Republicans are more hesitant to take the vaccine.
Personally, I tweeted last night, I'm happy to get a vaccine live on the show. I do trust science. I trust doctors. And quite frankly, I'd let them put an iPod Nano between my shoulder blades if it means I can get drunk at Caesar's Palace again. So I'll do whatever anybody wants, but I do trust the doctors. However, I want to show a clip to explain why it's happening with Republicans.
Let's just say there's a vaccine that is approved and even distributed before the election. Would you get it?
Well, I think that's going to be an issue for all of us. I will say that I would not trust Donald Trump, and it would have to be a credible source of information that talks about the efficacy and the reliability of whatever he's talking about. I will not take his word for it.
Well, so she's expressing skepticism about the vaccine under the Trump administration. A lot of Republicans I know are expressing skepticism about the vaccine.
Pause it.
Right.
First off, the number of Republicans who are going to listen to Kamala Harris, I would imagine, is somewhere hovering around 0. But she didn't say that. She said, I wouldn't trust Donald Trump. But what she was saying is that, but if the CDC, if it wasn't, and now we know, right? Like the CDC came out yesterday and it was revealed that there was multiple occasions over the course of the pandemic where Donald Trump, the Trump administration, interfered with the scientists there and prevented them from reporting on what was actually happening in terms of the COVID. So there were very founded fears that Donald Trump was politicizing the science to the point where, the day he left, he didn't even tell people that he was getting the vaccine because it wasn't politically advantageous to him.
The context also, just to add to your point, was that they're asking about this when he said that we're going to rush it out before the election. That's what the context of that is.
Absolutely. And she's saying, like, if there's some, I'm not going to listen to Donald Trump. I'm going to listen to the experts. And continue.
So she's expressing skepticism about the vaccine under the Trump administration. A lot of Republicans I know are expressing skepticism about the vaccine under the Biden administration, which is why this has been so dangerous, that this has become so politicized. Both sides are equally responsible for this, but the media really lauded her at the time when she said that. And she didn't get nearly as much pushback. We had people like Andrew Cuomo saying he wouldn't trust the vaccine rollout under Trump. And I think Republicans are contrarian by nature. We are built from my very fabric up to question authority and to question big government. And when big government is saying you have to do X, Y, and Z, sure, we're going to question it. I'm going to question it. And I think that there has been a real misstep with messaging from people like Dr. Fauci, which I know I'm going to get eviscerated for saying this. I don't 100% trust him, and I don't think that he is a unbiased actor in any of this, and he is a government official, as Sarah pointed out. I'm one of those people that feel that way about him. There have been many opportunities to write.
It was private companies that developed this. Pfizer is a private company. It's not a government official.
Republicans question authority?
Right.
Like, come on, Megan. They're like, they're licking cops' boots on the regular. That's all I got to say about that. I mean, it's like, doesn't even warrant any real substantive response. She's like Looney Tunes.
Why is Meghan McCain not allowed to drink at Caesar's Palace anymore?
Well, she needs her iPod Nano in her arm first, Brandon. Don't you understand? Like she comes up with these lines before the show, and she thinks they're real slick.
Megan and I have been working on some good comedy workshops. So I respect, it's a process we're working.
So here's what I have. Dave Rubin, Meghan McCain, 2 nights at the Laugh Factory, Texas, of course, because that's the only place you can have a live comedy show. And we can live stream it to the Caesar's Palace to get her sort of, I guess, her drinking privileges back wherever, for whatever reason they were taken away. Ultimately, though, I mean, I don't see how you can keep the logic she has going if Donald Trump actually got the vaccine. Like, I mean, once he gets the vaccine, it seems like the jig is up. Like, he was the one who was doing the kind of advocacy around sowing the doubt around necessarily needing it. He was kind of the leader there. Like, this seems like intransigence for the sake of intransigence if the precedent has already been set.
And I think that, if there's anybody who's promoting skepticism about the vaccine, it's she doing that right there.
With Dr. Fauci.
This is the same vaccine that came out under Trump. It's not the vaccine that Biden did. It just so happens that Biden's the president now. Does she not get that?
I mean, I think there are reasons to be skeptical about vaccines, about the vaccine, that range from illegitimate to legitimate. I would say her excuse goes, to the illegitimate side, in the sense that it seems entirely partisan. She's made the vaccine in her mind a partisan issue, not just like the vaccine, but, her understanding of science as a partisan issue, which, unfortunately is how we treat it. But in the case of the vaccine, it's the contradiction is clear when we've switched from it being developed under Republicans to being, given out under Democrats, and suddenly the same vaccine is no longer viable.
Well, it's projection. It's always projection for simple-minded conservatives like her. She's looking at the vaccine through a partisan lens. So it's the Democrats who are responsible for politicizing the vaccine rollout and not getting enough people vaccinated, when the proof is in the pudding. Donald Trump got vaccinated, deliberately didn't tell people because he wanted to appeal to the anti-vaxxer crowd. And now you have like double the proportion of Republicans who are saying that they would not get the vaccine, really, I think, than Democrats, or who are unsure. So it's like the numbers in the polling also don't bear out the picture she's trying to paint.
Let's play one more clip before we get to the phones and IMs here. This one, let's play two more clips. Sorry. I want to play this Matt Walsh one, and then I want to get to this this Steve Crowder one. I mean, that is...
The Crowder one is
Crowder's
insane.
Just insane. Here is, though, Matt Walsh. And boy, man, I got to say, my heart goes out to these guys like Matt Walsh, middling commentator on the right, always been middling, always going to be middling, and not much material to work with these days. They're just going to hang their hat on cancel culture. They're just going to ride this out until they call it something different. It was politically incorrect, and now or politically correct, and now it's cancel culture. And then in a couple of years, it'll be some other thing. But here's Matt Walsh lamenting cancel culture and saying conservatives could never do this.
Cancel culture, again, there are certain hallmarks of it. And it's a uniquely modern phenomenon, and it's uniquely leftist. There may have been, you go through history, there have been the Salem witch trials. There have been versions of if you want to call cancel culture. But in what we're referring to in modern society, and as I've said many times, it's very important to clarify, cancel culture is a leftist phenomenon.
Pause it 1 second. Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party and blacklisting? Modern era, you'll notice that the people had phones at that time and they were wearing suits. They weren't wearing, pilgrims hats, or there wasn't the Salem witch trial. Modern culture. Dixie Chicks.
Yeah.
Bill Maher. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but let's go back to here, Matt Walsh.
Boycotting the law that Republicans are, tried to put in place that would essentially criminalize boycotting Israel.
It's BDS. It's in half the states in the country, I think, have that law. But let's go back to Matt Walsh's sense of history.
Want to call cancel culture, but in what we're referring to in modern society, and as I've said many times, it's very important to clarify, cancel culture is a leftist phenomenon because it's all about institutional power, and they have the power to, because they control the institutions, they can destroy your career, destroy your reputation, expel you from civilized society. They have the power to do that. Conservatives, even if they wanted to do it, can't do it. So conservatives, even if they wanted to have their own cancel culture, don't have it. Because they don't have the power. We don't have the power. Leftists do. And we also know another really important part of cancel culture is that it is performative and fraudulent. And you're destroying people who either didn't do anything wrong, or even if they did do something wrong, the response to that infraction is way out of proportion. And the canceling is being spearheaded by people who are not really affected by it.
I'm old enough to remember when CPAC canceled Young Pharaoh's appearance. merely over some opinions and asking questions, at their special CPAC dedicated to, cancel culture. So I don't know.
It wasn't until literally 6 months ago that the Supreme Court said you can't be fired for being gay. You can still be denied housing if you're gay, but apparently conservatives don't have any institutions that they hold that they can cancel somebody. Like, you cannot be fired for being Christian, but you can be fired for being, or I should say, you cannot be denied housing because you're Christian. You can be denied housing because you're gay.
I think that cancel culture specifically applies to like only the professional or semi-professional media class, though. So when they, they consider people outside that class, they only count as like 1.25 cancels. But the moment you start a podcast or like web show, then, someone calls you a duty head online, suddenly your free speech rights are being violated. So
people don't realize that the founding fathers were mostly concerned about podcast hosts being critiqued on Twitter. That's the number one threat to our democracy.
Tell it to Gary Webb that you can't be canceled when you're a reporter.
It feels like a brand thing. I don't begrudge people like their little brand eccentricities, but once you see like the 15th comedy special called like Canceled on Netflix, which I still will not watch, and you just kind of gotta let it go. At a certain point, it's like, it's just for your own, think of your own brand, do something about the Glenn Beck, Ben Shapiro ripoff backdrop, do something about the talking points, like make something exciting. I keep saying it, but like maybe they should get into some more fringe conspiracies. QAnon's being played out, cancel culture's on the way out, the IDW is over. There are a lot of like new avenues that are going left unexploited.
Well, they're going to have to get into this 5G conspiracy. I think, what was that? Chuck Schumer or some other Democrats are trying to build up 5G infrastructure throughout the country. That's going to tap into that.
That's going to control Meghan McCain's iPod between her shoulders.
It's going to block our prayers. It's going to block our prayers. That's what 5G does. See, boom, right there. That's Fox and Friends' new talking point. I just think that like Trump, the 4 years of Trump didn't do much for comedy because, it was just a very, very lush ecosystem for content. There was always a day going by where he was saying something to make fun of or to defend. And now that he's gone off Twitter and, kind of out of social media sphere altogether, people are just left bereft of content. They got to start making it up. They're going back to their old tricks. And it's just, it's a little played out.
So in the COVID relief bill, there was $5 billion, I believe, that was set aside.
Half of the $10.5 billion that was set aside for farmers went to Black farmers.
Yeah, so $10.5 billion set aside for farmers. $5 billion were set aside to make up for literally decades of action by the U.S. government via the USDA that drove Black people out of farming. We know this because of investigations that were done across the board, even internal ones, that some of which led to a settlement, a major lawsuit settlement. Not hard to find USDA. And so $5 billion are set aside. How would you react to this if you're a conservative? Well, of course, you'd come out and say, I don't know, this is like Obama's, phone/fund, which was started during George W. Bush's era, or what. Here's how Steven Crowder responds. It's
like not even funny.
It's not, it's
not even funny to mock. Like, it's disturbing.
It's disturbing. Like, this guy's full on, like, this is something you'd imagine you would have seen like 40, 50 years ago. This is full on step and fetch it. This is unbelievable.
I don't know where you find this many farmers of color, but they did. And $5.2 billion are being allocated exclusively for colored farmers. Farmers of color, roll the tape.
We begin today's show looking at a major provision in President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill that aims to address decades of discrimination against Black, Hispanic, Native American and Asian American farmers who've historically been excluded from government agricultural programs. The American Rescue Plan sets aside $10.4 billion for agriculture support.
Hold on. That guy needs receipts on that?
I have stats right here if you want it. Like I read this. So white farm. Go on, Sam.
No, go ahead. You read your stats.
No, it's just like, so basically loans that were given by the Department of Agriculture and the federal government, let alone the subsidized land, heavily subsidized land that went to farmers throughout the country, so heavily favored white people that in 1910, black farmers owned 14% of farmland. White farmers now own 98% of farmland. Black farmers have lost 12 million acres of farmland since 1950, and there are only 45,000 black farmers out of 3.4 million farmers total. And that was basically because the federal government decided to systemically discriminate against black farmers in terms of federal loans and the land that was given to them, because farming subsidies basically keep small farms afloat. I mean, they're largely socialized in the way that our government funds them. So there's your receipts, Stephen Crowder.
Continue.
And allocates about half the funds to farmers of color who are, quote, subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice because of their identity as members of a group, unquote. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights confirmed as long ago as 1965 the U.S. Department of Agriculture discriminated against black farmers, but little was done to address the problem.
100 years ago? Yeah, most happy about the new policy, these people. So, yeah. I'm gonna buy a plow, man.
I'm gonna plant that corn.
Go get a John Deere. Barack Obama, mother, I'm the president of plowing that ass.
You.
I thought the last thing they would want to do was be farmers. Wasn't that a big problem for hundreds of years?
Yeah. Isn't that why Arsenio Hall called himself the urban man's Johnny Carson?
I think so.
Yeah, I don't know. Are people lining up out in the middle of cornfield, Iowa for new dunks?
How would you prove this, by the way? Like, how would you prove that you've been discriminated
You don't
against?
have to. You just
Well, I didn't get that loan. Sir, you had no credit. Well, that should not have stopped me from getting the loan.
I planted a Hennessy tree, but it's not growing.
Well, technically it did grow, but that shit ain't XO.
I put it in the ground.
I planted a VSOP XO tree. I'm getting in some niche esoteric cognac humor, motherfucker.
Don't white people just go to their neighborhoods and build urban farms and ruin their communities? Isn't that what
That's how it works in Detroit? Turns out the soil content is a high level of meth.
Yeah, crazy.
Whoa. Wow, I didn't know.
That and teeth.
There's
random teeth littered everywhere.
And by the way,
cocaine in my arugula.
I mean, it's almost hard to absorb.
So how long has he been practicing that minstrel voice, right? Like, he just wishes he had the opportunity to put blackface on and do that on his show, but then he'd be canceled. He seems to have been practicing that.
I don't watch a lot of Stephen Crowder. Why was he wearing the kind of leather
that's his
police
holster.
detective strap?
He has a holster. He keeps a gun on during the whole time.
Is he going to unload on his staff when if they don't practice their minstrel voices in time?
Important for him to dress like an 1860s sheriff.
That was just so full on racist. Like, it's almost like a parody of a racist show.
It's just a little antiquated, I think, Sam.
Yes,
I think you said it's
that's
like,
what I mean.
I'm surprised he didn't say they were going to grow the crops with like 40 ounces or something. It's just a little old.
He did.
He said Hennessy.
Hennessy.
He said Hennessy, so he updated it a little bit.
I mean, I guess it just strikes me as like the kind of humor you get like from the 80s, maybe late 90s, late 90s racism around when Joanna Man was coming out and like the white chicks and stuff.
Yeah.
2021. It's just, there are funnier racisms out there. No offense.
Honestly,
people are a little bit more clever now.
I think that is the thing, is that like his racism is so hack. It's like, that's what I mean. It's like a parody of a racist show. It's so racist and so lame that it almost looks like it's mocking itself, but it's not.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the easiest way I feel to like carve out a niche audience now. If you're not like actually funny enough to make jokes, which I will say I'm not. It's just to, stake out a semi-controversial opinion that people aren't taking anymore in the mainstream. And no matter how sloppily you do it, you're basically one of the only people doing it. And then it just becomes, part of this long-standing ecosystem of like the Republican and far-right complexes, A, victimology, and then B, like their incredible insecurity about not being funny. And it's just like, yeah, of course they'll support people like this who just like make the illusion of jokes because A, it harkens back to a time when I guess they were, people were making jokes like this, probably funnier still, but also it allows them to, make the argument that the right is getting funny again. The right has like, soldiers in the meme war, and they are very, very insecure about the fact that they're not funny. And it just speaks to like, yeah, we know on the left, on the center, anyone with the objective analysis of reality knows the right controls everything. Conservatism, neoconservatism, neoliberalism is the law of the land here. But what they don't like is that there aren't that many like Republican movie actors. They don't like the fact that like, James Woods isn't in movies anymore. Like, and that's what they just kind of like harp on so much. So they love guys like this, but it doesn't do service to comedy, I think.
And he said 100 years ago. This needs to be seen in the context of the Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack having issues with black farmers going back to when he was under Obama, saying this is all resolved, but like massive issues with disproportionate money going in USDA loans and microloans.
Well, that's just silly. I'm sorry to interrupt. That's silly because there are farms that are over 100 years old. There are people who are over 100 years old. It's kind of like you didn't even say like 500 years old, but they're like there are certainly generational farms.
Oh my Absolutely, gosh. Yes.
Oh my god, that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. This farm has been in my family for 5 generations. I've seen Smallville.
That's
I
the
know
whole
someone
mythology.
who has been farming the same piece of property, someone in his family, and he is one of them who's been farming that since the early 1800s. I mean, this happens all the time.
But that's the whole trope that Republicans want to say about their voters. They just don't want black people to be included in it, and they hadn't been for decades because of.
But there's, I mean, I know that there are Crowder fans who are going to be watching this video who are going like, they're not even critiquing it. Like they're not even explaining where it's racist. And just like honestly, the easy explanation for you people who don't get why this is racist is the implication. Well, I mean, as aside from like sort of making up these black voices and mocking them in the context of but black people can be farmers. Black people have been farmers since the beginning of this country, and they continue through this. And they were farmers. We just came up in our interview today about the thousands of black farmers who were incredibly successful in the what was then the Northwest territories of the country back when Ohio and that area was considered the Northwest territories. And their success was attacked head on by whites and our government, who basically outlawed their success. I mean, more or less, that's a broad stroke. But what's the name of the interview that we did on that a couple of years ago? Someone who's written a book on that. I mean, it's sort of more
basically
history
the two farming crises in the 20th century just redistributed farming wealth to white farmers.
And the ignorance that's associated with the idea that we're going to take this parody of a black person and show how ridiculous it is that they would be farmers, that if there would be meth on their soil, and that meth problem, I got some bad news for you folks, but it's a white problem.
Everyone knows American soil is full of like arsenic and poison, not meth.
Right, indeed.
But I mean, from my perspective, it's just like, this is one of those things that people complain about when they want to complain about, affirmative action or like reverse discrimination or whatever. Same with like the classic trope of the Mexicans are stealing our jobs, etc. Where it's just like, do you really want a loan to start a farm? Like, is that something Steven Crowder wants to do? Like, does he want a loan to start a farm that's being taken away by some theoretical black farmer? Is that like what's happening here? Or is this just, a hypothetical where these Black farmers don't deserve to, be able to work in an incredibly hard breaking industry, because they want to, because it might theoretically impact the ability of another theoretical white farmer who deserves a loan or something. It's all very vague and abstract. It's like a problem no one really has in terms, because most people don't want to be farmers. Like, most people aren't looking for a farm loan. There's a handful of people who do want it, and a lot of those people, rather, a decent portion of them are Black, and they've been historically denied it. And so, like, for someone who doesn't want a farm to be like super invested in Black farmers getting some kind of preferential treatment just comes across as incredibly odd. It's an odd albatross to have, unless you just really don't want Black people to have anything.
Well, it's myopic too, because it's like, just quickly, Sam, it's $5 billion in this massive COVID relief bill. It's a drop in the bucket, but this is what they choose to focus on.
The book Kid Tested Politic Bureau approved has reminded me the book is The Bone and Sinew of the Land, America's Forgotten Struggle for Equality. It was by Anna Lisa Cox, and we'll find out when she was on the program. I think
Sam, you talk about comedy and how you have trouble if the punchline isn't sort of can't be squared with reality, right? You familiar with what I'm talking about? So there's this moment in that clip where the guy says, "Systemic racism, how would you even prove that?" And first of all, MFer, you're the producer. Do some work and try to figure out if anyone's done anything about like how these loans have been apportioned. But then the guy's like, there's a moment where you can see the anxiety of the guys. Like, don't get in the way of our racist riff here. You couldn't prove it, of course. And then they go to talking about Hennessy trees.
it was August 27th, 2018. We did that book. Fascinating story. I mean, really fascinating story. People should check that out. It's The Bone and Sinew, I believe it is, of the Land. All right, let's go to some IMs and some phone calls. If you guys are up for it, let's go to 225 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam and the MR crew. This is Samantha from Louisiana.
Samantha from Louisiana. What's on your mind?
I called a couple months ago, maybe, about Gary Chambers Jr. He's running in Louisiana 2nd. I just want to give y'all an update.
All right, do.
So the last day to vote in Louisiana is March 20th, which is Saturday, this Saturday. And Gary is going to be number 6 on the ballot. Louisiana does a jungle primary. So 20th, the last day, you can actually go vote right now as well up until Saturday. And if you live in Louisiana 2nd, if you know somebody or you know somebody who knows somebody, let them know about Gary. And also, if you live in Louisiana 6th, that's my district. My congressman died of COVID before he got to take office. They're also doing his election. So go out. My plan usually for Louisiana, where I live, because it's so conservative, is just to vote for the very first Democrat on the ballot. And that's it. I appreciate you all taking my call.
Thanks for the call, Samantha. Let's go back.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Let's go back to the phones here. Calling from a 845 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Lauren. How you doing?
Lauren, what's happening? Did you tweet or IM that you were leaving teaching?
No.
Oh, maybe
no,
I get.
I'm not leaving teaching. I mean, although that was something I was thinking about back in the fall, looking at, the prospect
Right.
of teaching in person in the middle of a pandemic. But no, I'm not in school today, but I just finished up one leave replacement position doing special ed in elementary school.
Ah,
and
okay.
Getting ready to do another one in a couple of weeks.
Okay, great. What's on your
Yeah.
mind?
I'm not really sure after that Steven Crowder clip. My brain is blank. So thanks for that.
You're welcome. Anything I can do?
No, I was calling today to talk about the continued push for reopening schools. because, as you know, I'm upstate New York. A lot. I mean, some of the districts up here have been teaching kids in person since September. Most of them waited a few months until, November-ish to actually bring kids in. But I am aware of several districts in my area that are going full steam ahead to bringing all of the in-person kids in for 5 days a week.
Wow.
And, I've seen like internal all staff emails in a couple of districts where administrators are saying, well, we want to bring them in, but we can't until the CDC scales back the distancing. I have it on pretty good authority that districts are anticipating dropping distancing to 3 feet and installing barriers between the desks, and that'll make everything okay. So if, even if you don't have a kid in the schools, you're still a member of the community, and I think we all have a stake in what the schools decide to do if they wind up becoming like centers of community spread. So I would encourage anyone who can hear me right now, whether you're in New York or another state, to keep an eye on your local school district's website. If you see that they are having town hall meetings or school board meetings where they're discussing, continuing with the reopening and bringing kids in 5 days a week, there are some questions that should be asked, because I think a lot of the people who are demanding that their kids be, brought back to school 5 days a week have zero concept of what COVID classrooms look like, because it's not like it used to be.
Yeah.
There, at least I'm speaking just as an elementary teacher. I don't know what the upper levels look like. I know that there the kids get a little bit more movement because they're switching classes, but in elementary schools, the kids are basically stuck in the classroom all day. They have their breakfast in the classroom. They eat lunch in the classroom, which means all the kids take their masks off at the same time in the classrooms with dubious ventilation. We're upstate. It's like been 20 degrees and it's just like, oh yeah, open the windows. So, we're teaching kids with the windows open and they're sitting there in their coats, and it's just.
Well, that's the problem, right? I mean, the problem is that you could put kids in there. You could make it a lot safer if you had the ability to exchange the air in that room in a way that didn't cause kids to be sitting there wearing 4 layers on there because it's 20 below. If you had the ability to change the air in that room 4 or 5 times an hour, then, but we don't have that. Our schools don't have those type of ventilation systems. We don't have these type of protections. And so it's always contingent on these big ifs. And these ifs, we cannot satisfy those. I mean, certain private schools, they have the money, they do it. But for the most part, public schools don't have that kind of funding. And it's, I mean, look, I desperately want my kid to go back to school. I also anticipated on some level, and his school is doing mixed, but basically they couldn't, they didn't let us switch back in because they wanted to make sure there was enough room. And I was okay with that as well. I mean, I'm able to, sort of like deal with it and work with it. And he doesn't rely on school for lunch and whatnot, but the experience is not what it was, obviously, and it can't be at this point. But it's also like, look, it's just not until everybody gets vaccinated and you have the ability to do a real legitimate exchange of air in these classrooms, which you still have in this region anyways, probably another month until you can open those windows in a sufficient way and get some fans in there and pour it out. And there's other things you could do. We set up in the office a box fan with like a MERV 13 filter on it. And, we keep I have a CO2 meter in there that tells us like, how much air exchange we're basically getting.
Open window.
I mean, schools could do this, but not for another month. And once, the teachers who want to be vaccinated are vaccinated. But, this rush to get kids back into the classroom, I can understand it to some extent. I understand the desire, but it's just like, we can't do it.
I mean,
you can't do it.
I mean, I feel like what you're saying.
It's kind of mind-boggling. Sorry, Brendan, go ahead.
Oh no, you please go ahead.
Oh no, I'm saying this as a teacher who is fully vaccinated now. So I just want to also encourage everyone, if you're eligible, go get the shot. The side effects might keep you in bed for a day, but it's worth it. But you know what? It's not even me that I'm worried about. Like, we've had students who have had COVID and they were totally 100% asymptomatic. And the only reason we know the kids are sick is because other members of the household got sick. So everyone got tested.
Yeah.
And I'm not that familiar with the studies that are saying 3 feet is acceptable in schools, but I would imagine that's, presuming perfect mask use.
Yes.
I don't know how everyone eating lunch at the same time in the classroom factors into that. Ideally,
lunch is the toughest part.
Ideally, they have, because the kids are they're supposed to stay in their seat. They're all facing the front of the room. They're supposed to be eating, looking forward, not talking. Which sounds like a drag as an adult. Imagine having children trying to manage that. And, that's supposed to be the safest way for them all to take their masks off and eat lunch at the same time. And that's not going to happen with 8-year-olds. So that is a concern of mine, especially with these new variants out there and what they're seeing in Europe.
Yep.
So, if people want to take those concerns to school boards or town halls, what's the ventilation situation look like? Are they putting a maximum number of kids in the classroom? And also, I haven't seen anything about, pool testing or randomly testing students or staff members for COVID, to detect asymptomatic cases or whatever. That's nowhere. They are leaving that up to families, and they want to bring the kids back right after spring break. Like, give me a fucking break.
Well, Lauren, appreciate the call.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hang in there.
Absolutely.
Folks,
I will. And one more thing.
I don't know what that last thing is. Apologies. Let's go to the phones. Well, that's what I would say. If you're going to a school board meeting, you ask, how many times an hour is that room going to be exchanged in the classroom? And if they look at you like you're from a different planet, they don't have a plan. And they should also be asked, like, why aren't you doing pool testing? In other words, you randomly test like 20 kids in the class. Instead of going and sending each sample of those 20 to get tested, you combine the samples. What they do is, and then they test those samples, and then they know that it's there in the 20, and then they go back and they'll test each individual if one of them has it. But those are the basics. That's just like the basic. If they can't answer the question, how many times in that room do you anticipate the air being exchanged? And they come back with anything like less than 3 or 4 times an hour, should be like closer to 4 or 5 times an hour, then they're not doing any work. They're not doing anything. They're not doing work. Oh, Lauren says the last thing was to opt out of the state test this year. Absolutely. The data set's going to be garbage, she writes. Absolutely. The stress on the kids is it is absurd that they're doing this. It is. I mean, I'm seeing like my kid's elementary school teacher, fantastic. My high school student, she just looks at me, she goes like, I'm not getting any work. And my daughter is not the type of person who she's like, I'm cool with that, but I just want you to know I'm not getting any work. So it's a tough situation. Calling from a 908 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is this me?
It is you. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Brian from Somerville.
Somerville, Mass?
Yeah.
Sweet. Where in Somerville?
You
You don't have to give me your address.
Away from Porter Square.
Porter Square? All right, fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, I have to meet a student in 15 minutes, so I'm going to get this out as quickly as I can. So first of all, thank you all. You guys are amazing. I wanted to respond to something that came up in the chat stream in response to the interview with Alex this morning. Somebody made a really great point about how civility is connected to sort of meritocracy and technocratism and sort of credentialism. And that struck me as somebody who's in academia as like really accurate, right? There's this kind of both culture of civility in academia that sort of limits what you can say. And we also, like, when you think of what a credentialed, professionalized person is, right, they have that air of civility. But I wanted to push back slightly, and this might be a little bit of a hobby horse. I think critiques of civility and credentialism can slip into anti-intellectualism sometimes, and specifically critiques of nuance. So I think there's totally a bad faith way nuance can get used to sort of like slow down and shut down conversations. But I think it is one of those things like love that Alex talked about that has a radical potential. And so it's, when we think about nuance, it's more nuanced than it seems. The way I teach it to students is that not everything is equally nuanced, right? When you say nuance, you mean the actual complexity of the issue. And so I think most right-left discussions aren't nuanced today in America, right? There's not a lot of complexity to should people have access to healthcare or abortion or the right to vote, right? Those are pretty clear-cut issues. But when we're talking amongst each other on the left, I think nuance is still really important. And I've been thinking about this a lot because of Force the Vote. Because if you don't have a nuanced understanding of these political issues, and not necessarily like a degree in political science, but just like a willingness to understand, right, the details, the nitty-gritty, is kind of necessary, right? Because if you don't understand nuance.
I mean, you just a perfect example of that is during the impeachment, AOC tweeted out something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, but sometimes you take a vote even though you know you're going to lose. Sometimes it provides signaling, and she was jumped upon like, this is what we said about force the vote, but they missed the whole sometimes. Like that's the operative word, right? Like these things are contextualized. There's a difference between driving a wedge between Republicans and driving a wedge between Democrats. There's a difference between, and sometimes you do that, but sometimes you don't do that. I mean, yes, I agree. The challenge is what happens when you're faced with people who refuse to see nuance on the left. And I think I agree with you, like in terms of like the left, right, for the most part, I think there's just not a lot of opportunity for nuanced conversation. It's getting less so within the context of the left, it seems to me.
Yes, I agree. I don't have an answer. I have to go. Thank you for taking my call.
All right. Say hi to, I can't remember the barbecue place up there. What's the name of it?
Red Bones?
Yeah, man, I missed that.
Yeah, it's still there.
I know it's still there, but I haven't been there obviously in quite a while. I was more of an Inman Square guy, but we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
I mean, to the caller's point, just to jump in real quick, I think obviously when you critique credentialism and when you critique sort of nuance and meritocracy, et cetera, you can trend towards being anti-intellectual. I think the larger issue is that when you're talking about credentialism and nuance and stuff like that, and civility, who is able to define the parameters of what is civil, what qualifies as a credential or expertise within a field, and who is left out of that conversation? Who's left out of the conversation about like what it means to be credentialed to, let's say, make the decision about whether kids should go back to school or not? Like, should that be left up to the CDC? Should that be left up to teachers? Should that be left up to pundits and politicians? Should it be left up to the parents of the kids who are being have pressure put on them? So, I think there is a way to attack civility and a way to attack credentialism that just lies at the heart of attacking hegemony. Like these are just larger parts of our society that are being dictated by a power structure that wants to keep the status quo going. You know, we can find alternative modes of expertise and alternative modes for credentialization, but there still has to be that, right? There still has to be a level of, you know, meritocracy or technocracy, because the real critique is not that, you know, meritocracy or technocracy or expertise is wrong, you know, in like sort of a vacuum. It's that what we have now is not those things. Instead of meritocracy, we have this kind of neo-aristocracy where people who are largely from upper middle class, you know, backgrounds, who have similar life paths, are allowed to kind of just play experts. They're allowed to play experts in newspapers. They're allowed to play experts in politics. And people who do spend lots of years, let's say, getting scientific degrees in biosciences or epidemiologists, are treated as though they have equal weight to those people due to some sort of level of, you know, equality that doesn't exist, right? So, you know, we can critique credentialism in the sense that who is deciding what constitutes expertise in any particular conversation. It seems like now we have a definition that predisposes us to, you know, overweigh the opinion of people who just don't necessarily have anything, you know, any claim to expertise within the field. Like, and so, you know, I think we can fall into the pattern of it seeming anti-intellectual because we don't necessarily have a framework for how do we, you know, prove legitimacy without like actually subscribing to traditional modes of doing that, like PhDs and, you know, school, etc.
Yeah, I think I think you have a better argument that there can be a credentialism. Obviously, the practice of credentialism is, but there can be a mechanism for assessing credentials. I am very skeptical about the concept of any meritocracy really being developed because invariably, well, you need a fully democratic society before you can have a meritocracy, it seems to me, because all of our standards and all of our normative values are a function of, for lack of a better term, the ruling class. But it's really our normative. I mean, in the context of the United States, you know, all of our normative values are, for the most part, either directly or derivatives of white male values. I mean, that's it. I mean, period. And the cultures that we come from.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, but that's why I'm super skeptical about the concept of meritocracy. I just like.
No, I would agree. And I think it's important to highlight that point too, that like, yeah, well, we don't have a meritocracy. We've never had a meritocracy, and it's unlikely that we could ever get to a meritocracy. But I think in conversations around the idea of technocracy, around the idea of expertise, we frame it as though either we're moving towards one or moving away from one. And really we need to have a better understanding. Okay, well, we can't have one. We've never had one. Any illusion that we've had one is, you know, the result of the same sort of systemic inequality that you were, you know, talking about. And moves to move toward one need to be heavily critical of what that means, and so that they don't reproduce the exact same level or some sort of similar level of tyranny. We know that a lot of moves for equality, I would say, from the Democratic Party kind of just look like multicultural, you know, neoliberalism, multicultural neocolonialism, and that's not a meritocracy. It's just a, you know, colorblind system of inequality, right? So I would agree if I wasn't clear in the first part.
No. I think I mean, I think the idea is that the pursuit of these things is can be fruitful as long as it's done with the right consciousness. Folks, that's it for our phone calls part of our program today. I apologize. We're going to have to do some IMs and then get going here. Josh from Tucson. I see it's White Shirt Wednesday again, Sam. What have you, no green shirts for St. Patrick's Day?
I don't give it. I was like,
Brandon's the only Irish person here.
I ordered some sushi last night, and one of the ads on the app was have, you know, green drinks delivered to your apartment so you can celebrate St. Patrick's Day at home. I was like, that sounds fucking terrible. What's like?
I'll tell you what sounds terrible. Also, fucking going out on St. Patrick's Day.
Well, yeah. Well, that's don't do that. Obviously.
I dyed my toilet water green, so you know that's just the way I'm doing. That's the way I'm celebrating St. Patrick's Day. I'm Italian though, so you know.
Tanner from Brendan, how do you celebrate? You're not Brendan. You're not Irish, are you?
No,
Brendan or
Italian.
Brandon.
No, I'm talking Brendan.
I'm like I said, I'm ethnically New York, Bridget Tunnel. So I'm Irish Italian. I have a bit of Jewish in me.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, like North African.
Shoot, you know what? I had this from, I grew up in Worcester, Mass. I went to Doherty High. Worcester's a very Irish town, and I had
you're just about as Irish as anyone.
I had this. I sent to a friend of mine today. That's I got this pin from when I was in high school. That's
it's a shamrock with a
Star of David
on it. Yeah.
All right. Tanner from Alabama. Hey, Slam, Seder, and gang. Huge fan. Keep up the great work. Thank you. Abshkek. Okay. I think Ainsley's point about packing the courts is that if there's no filibuster, the Democrats can expand the courts, including the Supreme Court, from 9 to 11 or 13. Not sure whether the current filibuster rules apply to expanding the court. Oh, yeah, I guess that's true. We could do that.
Don't think they'll do that, though.
Oh, no, not a million years. Cool, Steve. As Emma said, when it comes to the filibuster, there's something brewing, and it's a cup of Joe Biden.
One of my best.
Alan Gore Lava. About my question yesterday, my name is pronounced Alina. Oh, okay. And I was asking about the possibility of going beyond the existing framework of capitalism, which is alike in Russia and China. I've lived in Russia. My question was dismissed like I'm some kind of silly reactionary. You didn't give a longtime listener the benefit of the doubt. I'm sorry. I don't know that I fully understand your question. I'm looking back at it yesterday. Shouldn't we as leftists be skeptical of big government? China and Russia rely on it too, and no material improvement for the people there. First off, I don't know that you could say that there's no material, at least in the context of China. I mean, but I don't know. I don't understand. I don't understand what big government means in this.
Quite a lot's happened regarding poverty, I think, in the last generation in China.
Yeah, but I also don't understand what you mean by big government. I mean, they have 1 billion people. Like, what their government should be. I don't understand.
I don't think big government is a thing
Helpful
that the left fears. I think that's like a libertarian kind of thing that has infiltrated the left, like as a talking point, that there are a lot of people on the left who are afraid of big government, but government should be as big as it needs to be to give me my $2,000 every month.
Exactly. I mean, I think she has a different point, but I don't think it's a question of giving you the benefit of the doubt. I just don't understand the question. Crowder's twink friend. Sam, do you think Tulsi's trying to position herself to be Trump or whatever the Republicans' running mate in 2024? In a million years, I couldn't tell you.
I think she just wants to cash in on the right, and she's following the money.
I'd love another like 2016-esque like Republican primary though. That was pretty good.
That was fun. That was fun.
Oh yeah.
Josh, Kansas City. Hey, y'all, new member, longtime watcher. Please, a show far from my father, who's meddling retirement and running for office in Missouri. Main issue he'd fight for would be to remove Rush Limbaugh bus from the state capitol. Oh, yeah, we'll give him one of these for that. Shelby from Phoenix. I've been sending one email every week to Sinema telling her to reform the filibuster. We need to keep applying pressure. Indeed, minimum wage. Are we going to see Biden pardon Edward Snowden in his first year in office? I would imagine unlikely, but I think he should.
Obviously he should, but that's not going to happen.
Kopech, we're seeing the most vaccine hesitancy amongst young Republican men. Why do you think that is? Because of Kamala Harris, of course.
Yeah.
Afraid of being penetrated, very beta.
Culturally Catholic. Call your representative to see if they support Medicare for all today. Indeed. Mutts Butts, Mitch McConnell, the chimney sweep of the crematorium. We're working on trying to get Jay Paul on or somebody on to talk about the drop of the Medicare for all bill. And you're gonna be hearing a lot more about it. I think they're gonna start the pressuring now. Got to be quick. Didn't the irony of civility start with Romans in reference to barbarism being used as a descriptor to non-Romans? and then way later to colonialism and the use against indigenous people. It's always been a justification for violence, including racism. Indeed. Emma's distant cousin. One of the reasons Tucker Carlson's upset about pregnant fighter pilots is because he knows no woman wants to get pregnant by him. Not Karen. We already did that one. Momentary Zen. This civility interview is bringing to my mind the Daily Show rally to restore sanity. And I'd like to ask Emma what she thought of it at the time.
The rally to restore sanity from Jon Stewart. And
yeah.
I mean, again, I think that was, I don't remember. I'm sorry.
You were young.
Yes.
You were in high school.
Yeah, I think so.
That was forever ago.
Move on.
We're pissed. Brycuda, Emma, what are your thoughts about Dalton going to the Bears?
I feel bad for Bears fans, but I think they're like overplaying how bad it is. He's an improvement over Nick Foles, but what were you going to get? I mean, you're going to trade 4 firsts for Russell Wilson, and he has that like $27 million signing bonus with the Seahawks. So it's just like they have to pay that anyway. They're not going to trade him this offseason. But I try to keep it quick for the other viewers.
Tom Houtman, the labor movement of the 20s and 30s won outright outside the system. There was no right to form a union. The system made it outright illegal to do so. Appealing to the system ignored until violence became too distasteful to the system. Senator Bain McConnell is deeply cursed bit. You merely adopted obstructionism. I was born in it. Sorry to spam the IM, but I know conservative reaction to women liberation is Sam's bet noir. The Salem witch trials were a response to changes in gender roles within a society. They literally canceled women for challenging the patriarchy. Nice guy. Really enjoyed your interview with Alex Z. Joyce from PA, you said you think there's a hole in the show's viewpoint with Jamie's departure. Matt Leck does a good job of representing the left. Also, Matt uses more accessible language. Sometimes Jamie's jargon was a little hard to follow. Jonathan Armstead, Emma, loved hearing you say you were related to someone who worked in the Innocence Project. Could they ever be a guest down here on Ring of Fire? You could even try for my hero, Barry Sheck, by saying that Sam followed up his role in Northern Exposure by playing Barry in Peoples versus the O.J. Simpson. He may not know who Rob Morrow.
No, well, it's a she. It's my stepsister. I love her. You know, she's a close friend too, not just related to me. And I'll ask her, but I don't know if that's in her constitution.
Angel, I love Brandon Sutton's dry ass humor. Chardonnay, Emma's take on Cuomo spot on, and her palpable anger is beyond justified. Cuomo is a dumb thug. Kevin from Philadelphia, Daily Sports Fix. Emma, we already beat that Sixers Knicks game last night.
I don't want to talk about that.
Teacher Lauren, last thing was to opt out of the state's test this year. Mind Pillow guy. Some people wrote in and said, but I use those tests to just measure the kids' academic achievement, but it's low stakes for you. And I used to do this with my kid too. This year, I just think it's like, the problem is it's still used in a way that dictates like things like, teachers and whatnot. It puts people on the back foot, and I am all for testing, but I am not for high stakes testing. The testing should be a mechanism for assessment, not for anything but that. Not assessment of teachers, assessment of the kids to get a sense of how they've progressed over the course of the year and where they may need some help. But it should not be used for funding. It should not be used to determine quality of teachers. It's just not effective in that way, and it creates bad incentives. Did you see the White House dyed the water fountain green for St. Paddy's Day? It looks like Nickelodeon slime. Silver Ball Stud, Majority Report has radical guests on both sides of the fun half. Barrett, home too. Yes. Why wouldn't you have the kids take the state test to get an idea of how education went from their home? My family used those tests for a tool of education benchmarks. You can find others online if you want. All right, 4 more. MSNBC, shill, Sam Seder. Not if you guys are mentioned, but they're going to reintroduce Medicare for All in the House. We did over the past 2 days. Funny enough, haven't heard much about it from the Force the Vote crowd. Kid tested, Politburo approved. Just filling me in on the bone and sinew. Thank you for that. Freedom Poutine. Remember when Republicans literally canceled French fries in the Capitol because France wouldn't help I do. They call them freedom fries.
Mm-hmm. That's a throwback.
True story.
Yes.
And the final IM of the day is from A Squared. Sam, that clip is just well racist, but like you've said before, there is no shame. It's all the quiet parts being said out loud. But thanks for playing it. Great to see and hear Brandon on the show more often. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us today. Great job. Emma, Matt, Brendan, great job. See you guys tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.